All right. Hello, students, to the last lectures for this class. Um, yeah, sorry I couldn't give a live lecture for this one, so I'll just record this and this will be posted on. Um, so today I'm just basically going to wrap up everything that is to say. We're getting into just kind of very recent events that have happened in the history of Iran, which are, from a historical perspective, are still too early to be kind of considered uh, for history, in my opinion. There's information, there is just kind of surface narrative stories and details you can go over, but as far as kind of a grand historical analysis, it's too early for that. But before I begin, I just want to, thank you guys so much for sticking through this. Everybody is doing great as far as the grades go. The projects are amazing. The writings are great. We have covered 2,500 years of general overview, which can kind of be a very good guide for you to now branch off into more detailed class sessions. If you want to take modern Middle East or U.S.-Iran conflict classes, or Iranian culture, even surrounding countries, Pakistan, Israel, Iraq, Iraq War. It goes on. And now you have kind of a bigger, a kind of a sense of a long narrative from Sean's perspective, which should be a question, of course, goes without saying, every step of the way. But also, if you take a class, for example, on the history of Iraq or Iraq War, now you have a kind of better sense of what some other things were happening in the world at the time, both in the United States or in the Middle East, or in a sense, as far as these things go. So I have at every lecture, I believe, since this coronavirus and before, told you what your expectations are, given you the criteria for the exams and stuff. So I'm not going to go over it again, but it is in the syllabus. You're always welcome to email me, contact me, phone numbers. We can set up one-on-one meetings. That is always encouraged. We'll do it over the cam, of course. Or even, like I always said, there's, if I get 3 emails about, I don't understand this part of this history, can you make another lecture about it? Gladly will do it. So feel free to contact. So I'm just kind of going to go over a little bit of what we were talking about last night today, and then continue, and then kind of sign off. It will be a brief lecture. So so last time we were talking about the aughts with the presidency of Ahmadinejad. You saw a kind of a conservative resurgence in Iran after kind of a couple of eras of reform, and to the perspective of some people, failure of progress in social and economic and world relation needs of the people of Iran. And I'm on the slide that says nuclear on the second half of the 2000s. So you have kind of these new sanctions after 9/11 being implied on Iran, and kind of the relationships are still deteriorating between Iran and the US, but they're getting better with Iran, China, and Russia, and some European countries, excluding France and Britain, who, due to historical and cultural reasons, do see themselves as allies of the United States. Yeah, but there is kind of a, especially this uh, 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 kind of focus on Iran's military abilities and especially nuclear abilities. But there, as I've kind of tried to emphasize, underneath all this is a question that countries like US are asking themselves, that should Iran be a player within that region, or if there are players within that region, political players with substantial kind of voice. Um, should it be Iran, or should it be Israel, or should it be this kind of project that is developed in Iraq, which as the 2000s go on, it is the opinion of a lot of experts that it's kind of a failure. Even in Afghanistan today, I don't know if you guys are paying attention. For the past couple of years, U.S. is very kind of ready to get out of there and making deal with the Taliban, the very people that we were in war for now 2 decades to get rid of. So that is that. And if anything, there are, just like the Israel's failure to deal with PLO, who went from a militia into a political entity, same thing has happened to the Taliban. You went from kind of a militant power who had kind of a lot of had a lot of kind of say in different regions of Afghanistan, and now they are a recognized political entity. And of course, these entities, of course, very much rely on them being recognized as the enemy of this, external imperial power, which would be U.S. From their perspective. So yeah, so I talked to you about how these countries are dealing with Iran's abilities at this time, which is takes a lot of things from the assassination, sanctions, and such. So let's go to the domestic situation in Iran at this time. And I want to kind of return a little back to the middle of 2000s, 2005 especially. So there is a kind of a lack of trust happening regarding the election. People are not some segment of population is not very trusting of Ahmadinejad and happy with his election. So there are a lot of distrust regarding the 2005 election. At this time, though, Ahmadinejad, it's very important to say, and this is kind of a very good critique of people who kind of constantly, especially in Iran, have this, especially since the culture of it goes way back, but especially since the revolution, have kind of blame the U.S. and other nations for Iran's domestic ills, right? So there are ones that are legitimized, but there are some that are not. For example, under Ahmadinejad, you have oil being at $149 a barrel, right? So Iran is having a lot of, as a mono economy, money coming towards it, but it's still, Ahmadinejad is kind of unable to reconstruct Iran in a way that is satisfactory to this growing expectations of the citizens of Iran. Now, there were a lot of infrastructural developments, especially in Tehran, which are pretty amazing from some perspectives, and it's good to kind of look at articles on this. But nevertheless, there is a dissatisfaction as it happens. there is a financial focus on Arab countries, so at this time, Iran is kind of trying to make more deals with Arab nations, and there is a misuse of loans that. So one thing is like Ahmadinejad's doing, especially on the question of infrastructure, is the same kind of neoliberal approach that you see starting under Rouhani. I mean, it starts under Rafsanjani, but really picks up on their, sorry, Khatami. Rouhani is not a president yet. And this idea is to give public funds to private entities, and as it has been the story for especially in you and I's lifetime, in the 2000s, a misuse and mismanagement of this. People taking this money and some kind of misuse in a sense of, for example, like stock buybacks. For example, in US you have kind of the government subsidizing a lot of companies, and the idea is that we're going to give you money so you expand your operations and hire more people and raise wages. Well, a lot of this money goes back to those companies buying their own stocks and whatnot. So the same thing is happening in Iran. A lot of this kind of investment of the public funds are turning into just very consolidated and consolidated wealth, for a very, very small segment of population. And again, this is a huge problem in Iran because the wealth gap in Iran is horrific. Especially to this day, and some of this money goes outside the country, as it is the case with the upper class. So this idea of privatizing this approach to the development of nation also kind of passes out into how the welfare programs would shift from, like developing institutions that are under regulation, and they're monitored, and there's kind of expectations from the democratic institutions of the country, like the parliament. And there's a shift from that towards this idea of charity, and the charity is kind of a more loosey-goosey kind of connection of approach towards poverty and social ills, right? So rather than having which is kind of the weird, because if there was a one thing that Islamic Republic was very successful, and this, you have to give some credit to the Shah for this, because he actually built the institutions that Islamic Republic used for this, and this idea of very established welfare programs. You're right, like, for example, for the people who were participating in the Iraq War, building these institutions that would make sure that their families were taken care of. They had access to education, free health care, access to food, and, you know what I mean, subsistence, housing. So to this kind of stuff, but of course, when you pass this on to the charity and you kind of deconstruct, or as the neoliberal word is, to implement austerity on the institutions of government, and then you pass on rich people to, hey, by your goodwill, take care of these people, there's a lot of room for corruption. At this time, there is a 13 to 25% inflation. And I want you to pay attention to these numbers, right? $149 a barrel at that time. Right now, we're talking about negative 40 or something. You know what I mean? So imagine what is happening in Iran right now. Actually, there was in Bloomberg News, there was this idea that Iran is going, and in order to help to build the Venezuela's oil infrastructure, which is also under heavy sanctions, they're kind of just like taking gold from Caracas, and then they're shipping it to Iran in order to use because these countries are kind of running out of money. You know what I mean? Like they just when the country doesn't have any wealth, um, it's hard to run a country. You know, do we do it like the idea of is the benefits of being an empire, it's like United States, is that I loan myself money. Like who's going to say no? You know what I mean, or who's going to ask it back? I mean, there is, for example, uh, 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 not just the domestic loan that we give to ourselves, but imagine like would China, for example, just call up all its loans, which you hear this kind of like uh, stupid economic argument, especially on internet, like this idea that, well, what if one day China asks for all this loans from US? Well, China will never do that because who buys Chinese products, right? United States. Like you have it like a consumer society. Like if people in the US don't have money to buy Chinese goods, like what are giving back all their loans back good for? That money is just going to be meaningless if it's not going towards their production and if we're not buying it. You get the idea. So this is you have to kind of consider your international society, right? International world, right? And when like inflation is good a little bit, a couple of percentage maybe that is artificially controlled. For example, in US, if the dollar is cheaper, dollar is usually very expensive because it's the strongest currency in the world. But when the dollar is cheaper, a lot of people can buy or sell more to the United States, right? It's kind of maybe not good for the people inside the country. I mean, it doesn't matter. It's just such a small percentage, except to the poor, where that small percentage becomes substantial. But it is good. But when you talk about inflation of 13 to 25%, that's a lot, right? For example, 20 years ago, 1,000 Tuman with the Iranian currency was around like $1, and now it is like 1,500. 15,000 Tuman to a dollar, right? So this inflation is just out of control, which makes money just useless. You can't even imagine. Imagine you're in Iran. The new iPhones come out, and you are a private consumer, and let's say you have I'm going to speak in dollars just so we don't have to kind of convert back and forth. Let's say you have $1,000, 1,000 tumans. I'm just going to keep them 1-to-1 just for the example. And you're very excited to like get this phone, and phones are important. You do work with them, you connect to your family, you can't live without them really. And let's say like by the time you hear like the iPhone release announcement till it comes out, suddenly that $1,000 that you have, or 1,000 Tuman that you have saved up, it is worth half as much, right? So you need like 2,000 Tumans to buy it, and imagine that. Yeah, I mean, it's not like your wages are changing. You're still getting the same amount of money. It's just your money's becoming useless. Now, it's very hard to discuss inflation, not to people that are in business or kind of familiar with international trade and politics, but average American citizen can't really compute this this idea of inflation, the way it happens overseas, we're pretty insulated from it. But if you speak to your grandparents, they most certainly know what it is for radical shift in inflation, or unless you know people that are in the trade and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a serious issue. Um, There is a radical increase in population because, so these are the effects of previous policies, right? For example, during the Iran and Iraq War, a lot of young male Iranian men, especially, went and died. So then there was this um, kind of response from the governments. I mean, Ayatollah Khomeini would talk about this idea that let's have a lot of kids, right? Like let's have 3 kids each, and then there were billboards. Then by the time I was a teenager in Iran, that billboard was like, 1 is great, 2 is perfect, right? So we want to stop at 2, right? And then there's no laws against this. Like these are just kind of the way the government kind of passes kind of speaks to his population about what we ought to do, right? It's a kind of an encouragement, right? But it's kind of hard to shift from this to that, right? This idea that we have very low population. Is it right? So, for example, we have a lot of countries. We're constantly bombarded with this idea that there's an overpopulation problem in the world. That might be true for right now or for a certain extension, but the large amount of kind of there is a understanding, globally speaking, in general terms, that you and I's generation, when we grow older, because we're having fewer kids, right? Even though we are kind of in the boom of population, there won't be enough young people who are at an adult age in a good financial standing to take care of our generation, right? There's a lot of us, we're all going to get old. And then, not only there's not enough nurses and doctors and whatever it takes to take care of that population, there's not enough people to work, right? Families to take care of us. They're not making as much to have enough funds of taking, care of an extra member, right? So there's this kind of capitalism, shifts its perspective of what is family, right? Once maybe, a lot of you guys, I mean, I do remember of a lot of households where kids stay in for a longer time. The grandparents maybe move in and live with them, but that's going to change because less and less people can afford this idea of family. So it has to change. So nevertheless, for right now, there isn't. We are dealing with those with what the Iranian government kind of encouraged my parents to do, and with people like me. So there's a lot of young people like me in Iran who are, where there is somewhere about, real unemployment numbers are 30 to 40. God knows what it is with this coronavirus. I don't even know those numbers. We have to wait for that history to come in. But yeah, yeah. So I think the unemployment numbers for the youth up until 10 years ago, it was like 30-40% youth of my age, that is. So that is a problem, right? Because not only these are not working, creating wealth and stuff, they are they're in more financial need of their parents and government and yada yada yada. So high unemployment, and then there's the rising cost of living, and then there is not a stagnation of wages, but not enough. Kind of the same idea that's happening in the United States and many countries in the world, right? Like Japan and Germany. Yeah. So then there is this idea of clash between fundamentalism, which I talk about, and conservatism, where more where Ahmadinejad is, and then there's this decline as is there is this lack of hope in this idea of liberalism, reformism. Now, this I'm speaking in general terms. We'll see that this idea of resistance in Iran is pretty strong. There is always protests. There's always this idea of um, engaging in politics and harm reduction. Just the kind of same predicament that people in U.S. might feel right now. I was a Bernie Sanders guy, but now I have to vote for Joe Biden. So that idea of harm reduction in order not to have Trump. So that idea is still a version of it works in Iran. I wanted to say something. I kind of um, Oh yes, yes. This idea is when there was the parliamentary elections a couple months ago. There's this idea that on BBC Farsi they were talking about it all the time, and this idea that because there's a council of guardians and council of experts, and they're vetting out all our kind of more liberal and reformist parliamentarian and presidential candidates that are they were put on house arrest or not qualified to run, like should we even partake in the parliamentarian politics, which is again a predicament of left and even liberal leftists, maybe not the centrists, in different parts of the world, right? Like you saw it in France, definitely with the loss of Jeremy Corbyn, in Britain, and in US again. There's a big chunk of the population, about 20%, that is like, what is this even for? If these countries like keep moving to the right, and this idea of leftist kind of projects for reform are keep dwindling and have been since the 80s, like what's the point, right? And so this might sound weird to you because in some of your minds you're saying that, like what does Iran's kind of religious republic have anything to do with this paradigm of left and right? And I assure you, there is a lot of convergence. As much as the right tries to set itself against Islam, the idea of cultural conservatism, and economic austerity are at times are very much aligned. And people in these countries, some of them do. When they see themselves in the world, do kind of associate with this left-right paradigm. There is an increase in censorship and incarceration at this time of 2000s. The Basij and the Revolutionary Guard, which are connected to the offices of the Supreme Leader, are kind of becoming increasingly dislodged from the democratic institutions of the government and kind of taking orders straight from above to periodically do crackdowns or pester people. And there is a stagnation and emancipation of women, right? Especially during the Khatami, there was a lot of hope in the change of kind of women's access to rights and equality and advancement of those causes. And, like always, as I say, there are changes, but not enough for the people. And with the kind of presidency of Ahmadinejad, those hopes kind of evaporated to some points, and there were a lot of kind of clashes with the police. By the end of the 2000s, oil prices dropped. They come to, and this is when Ahmadinejad is almost on his kind of on his second term of presidency. There is a $30 barrel. There's further inflation, but at this time, with the entrance of, and then there was a lot of protests, especially in 2000. the 10, you have this kind of green revolutions going, coinciding kind of with the Arab Spring, which the government cracks down very hard on, right? They kill people. But with kind of entrance of uh, 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 Obama, there is kind of easing and relaxation of this external threat, which is the United States. With that, this time is very established on all sides of Iran. So let's talk about these. This kind of era of unrest a little bit. So in the presidential election of 2009, you have Ahmadinejad, who's now going against Rafsanjani. He is back. He wants to run as a reformist. Mousavi and Kahroubi. This election is takes this form of, again, much like the U.S. This urban population wants to be liberalized and is in for reforms, and then rural societies, which are kind of happier with the conservatives, and the conservatives, to be kind of to their credit, pay more attention to these people as far as infrastructure and welfare. Even though it comes as a form of not so institutionalized. So at this time, there is a the main front runner against Ahmadinejad becomes Mousavi, who gets the 13 million of the votes, and Ahmadinejad gets around 24 million. There was a sense that this was going to happen, but this idea that there was like a 10 million vote chasm between the two kind of led people to suspect kind of interference in the elections again, right? Like 2016 United States. So that is when there's again huge protest, and the government cracks down pretty hard. They kill some people, arrest hundreds of people, if not thousands. Let's just go say the hundreds. The Supreme Leader Khamenei even supports Ahmadinejad. He says we had our election. He's the rightful winner. And the Council of Guardians declares Ahmadinejad the president of the United States, the president of Iran, and that is that. And that's he begins his second term, which is kind of a just era of a lot of division within Iran. So I'm just going to close this lecture with this idea that after Ahmadinejad does serve his presidency, there is a kind of a coalition, even though the elections are very much controlled, especially by the conservative branches of government connecting to the supreme leader. Hassan Rouhani, who's the president of Iran now, in 2013 becomes inaugurated. He, kind of like Ahmadinejad, is from around Semnan area. He's actually from Sorkhe, if you want to know exactly where he's from. He was born in 1948. He was very young when the revolution happened. He was kind of around your age, but he was very involved. But he was very much involved, especially with the war efforts too. And beginning in the 80s, he's in the parliament, and it kind of constructing his political career through and through. So he's kind of a known person, but he came up in this election of 2013 again as a reformer. Now, like Khatami, he is he wears the religious Shia garb, and much like Khatami, he's a scholar, right? I don't know if I failed to mention this, but Khatami is, the Rouhani and Khatami, they've authored many books. I mean, many. Like, I don't know a U.S. president that has this many books on their on a variety of subjects. They lecture at universities. Especially on the topics of philosophy, foreign policy, metaphysics, uh, religious stuff, about like Islamic countries or Shia histories of Shiism. He's very much like Khatami in that sense, and he was, which kind of. Appeals to the youth, right? This idea of the philosopher king, or the intellectual representative, because there is a presumption around the world that this kind of promises of reform and change backed by a certain higher intellect leads to a better world. I don't know. That's my opinion. That's how I see how where the kind of the appeal is of some of these people. So Hassan Rouhani is, he's the president now, and he is coinciding with Barack Obama, who's very eager to make a deal with Iran against his own Congress and Senate, which Obama loses in his second term. But something does come out of this Obama-Rouhani era of hope and change and reform. There is definitely a reduction in tension and a lot of back channel talks. But the most important of this is 2015 Iran deal, which had been worked on for, like close to 10 years, like starting in 2008 or something, back channels in parts. The deal is between the Iran and UN Security Council, but not all 15 of the Security Council. It's between Iran and what we call P5+1 or E3 plus 3. P5 plus 1 is so there are 5 countries like US, China, Russia, France, and United Kingdom, which is Britain and Ireland, right? My Irish students, don't get mad at me. That's just how UK is going with right now. +1, the +1 is Germany, right? Why +1 is Germany? Because World War II. This is a history to kind of go through, but that is articulated. But in Europe, they know it as E3 plus 3, right? Again, United Kingdoms, France, Germany, plus the 3 other countries that are outside China, Republic of China, the Federations of Russia, and the United States of America. Right? So these are the core of the Security Council. So no resolution can pass through because all these countries have a veto power, by themselves, right? They're the permanent council, but then there is like 15 countries that are within this council, and then there's more to the structure, but that's the deal. So the deal was between Iran and these countries, and the gist of this nuclear this Iran deal is that the United States would remove its nuclear-related sanctions on Iran, right? Which would lead to other countries who are within the council with the United States to also do so and help Iran with its development. And for return, Iran would give access to inspection of its nuclear program, especially on the subject of uranium enrichment. So the deal did went through in 2015. it was a very hard deal, because the reformers in Iran, they're pushing for this, but then their conservatives and fundamentals are, still kind of part of their political capital comes from this idea of being antagonistic to United States because the United States because of history, everything we've talked about. There's a high distrust, but they also define themselves again on this what they see as an imperial power. Nevertheless, it goes through, it sits for a year, and the President Trump, kind of one of the first thing that it does is to withdraw U.S. From this deal. Now, this is not my opinion. This is the official language. When a country pulls out of this program, it's called the breaking of the deal. So the United States was the one that violated this deal, right? And there was kind of, even though the Department of Defense themselves said that Iran is complying, the Security Council said Iran was complying. The International Atomic Energy Agency, which is in charge of checking out these things and sending inspectors, said Iran was complying. But for political reasons, Trump withdrew, and which led to the conservative end saying, telling the reformers, like, look, we told you this is a, this is a backstabbing, untrustful country. You try to deal with them, and this is what they do to you. And kind of that's how that ended, and which kind of led into this increase in tensions, as we've been seeing. Some of these happened during our class with the assassination of Soleimani, right? The thing, for example, Soleimani, who's a general in the Iranian forces, especially the Quds forces, he is, he was very proud of. For example, traveling in Iraq or in Syria without his convoy, right? Just in kind of personal cars, because the idea was that I have the support of these people that I'm here in their country as a guest to help them for whatnot, and that the United States has a line that they won't cross. So when he got bombed, when there were in the midst of a diplomatic visit to meet some of the representatives from some Arab countries, it was a shock that the United States would do that, because there are, you have to understand that in international politics there are tensions, right? But people rely on rational actors, right? Like there are certain lines that people don't cross, right? For example, if General Petraeus is coming to have to Iraq, right, that the Shia militias that are very strong in the south will keep it cool that day, right? If they know that the visiting happened, and nevertheless, Iran just killed this man, and in retaliation, Iran, of course, bombed the U.S. camp, but they hid close by it, and they had given warning beforehand, so some personnel is removed that this was going to happen. It's weird. War is happening right now. War is, maybe it is an extension of politics. Iran most certainly did not want to escalate, but they had to respond. You can't get smacked in the kind of the international theater and then not act. Iran had to do something, so they retaliate as such. But the retaliations of back and forth are nothing new. It's just this intensity is new, right? Especially U.S. constantly keeps warships in the Persian Gulf, very close to Iran, and then Iranian boats go near them. And now, a couple of days ago, Donald Trump was saying that, hey, we might start firing on these boats. And the Iranian boats have seized U.S. boats before and getting their crew which they say they are in our waters. So there is that. But yeah, so up until recently, before coronavirus, again, inflation is bad. Um, uh, Gas prices are, something we've never seen. I don't even know how to really think about that much. But there were a lot of protests in Iran, a lot of unrest. Um, and that usually happens under conservative and fundamentalist kind of uh, Islamist um, uh, uh, presidencies, but now it's happened under reformists, which means that people are just, both politically and economically have hit their limits. And so that is the kind of the open-ended um, um, uh, uh, yeah, we just have to kind of leave the story here. Sorry, I'm kind of starting to drift off. That we'll see what happens. We're at a very uncertain times, but I hope that I've been able to give you enough information that from now on, when you see Iran in the news and you read about it, you kind of have a better understanding of what it is that you're looking at. Okay, so yeah, again, if you have any questions or concerns, contact me. Let's talk about it. Let's get those A's, and I wish you guys a lot of luck during your finals week, because as a longtime student, I understand how difficult these times are. But hopefully after this summer, I always took summer classes during school. I'm just a nerd like that, but hopefully this pandemic will end and you guys will have some of the best days of your life, returning to sunshine. All right, guys. Again, thank you, and it's been an honor to teach you. And yeah, hopefully I'll run into you guys and talk to you guys soon. Okay.